You know, we live in a world that absolutely worships evidence. We're all taught to trust science, to trust the data, to see the proof. But what happens when we're facing life's biggest questions? You know, the ones about meaning or morality or faith, where the evidence just goes silent. Are we supposed to just believe nothing? Well, today we're going to dive into a philosopher's really bold answer to that exact problem.
So this is our starting line, right here. This statement from the mathematician W.K. Clifford is powerful. It's absolute. You could almost call it the unofficial motto of the scientific age. And the rule's simple, it's uncompromising. If you can't prove it, you have no business believing it. Period.
All right, so let's first get a really firm grip on this dominant idea, what we're calling the rule of evidence.
So this ideal, it demands that our beliefs be totally impersonal. It shouldn't matter what you hope is true or what feels good to believe. From this point of view, believing something just because you want it to be true, that's kind of like an intellectual crime. It's like you're betraying your duty to find the truth.
But then along comes the American philosopher and psychologist William James, and he takes a look at this super strict rule and asks a really simple but, wow, a really profound question.
Right? What do we do with the big stuff? You know, is there some kind of moral order in the universe? Is this big career change worth the risk? Should I trust this person? Science, well, it can't give us a definitive yes or no on these things. So does Clifford's rule mean we're just forbidden from ever taking a stand? This is the exact problem that James sets out to solve.
And to tackle this, he doesn't just make some kind of emotional argument. No, he's a philosopher. He builds a really precise toolkit for thinking clearly about the kinds of choices we all face.
Okay, so first up, he defines a hypothesis as basically anything you could believe. But then he makes this brilliant distinction. He says a hypothesis can either be live or dead. A live hypothesis, think of it like a live wire. When someone presents it to you, it makes this kind of electric connection. It feels like a real, genuine possibility for you.
And here's the key insight. The liveness of an idea isn't in the idea itself. It's all about its relationship to you. So for someone who grew up in a Christian home, the idea of be a Christian is probably a live hypothesis. But for that same person, the suggestion to believe in the Mahdi, an Islamic messianic figure, well, that probably makes no connection at all. For them, it's a dead hypothesis. It's just not a real option on the table.
So this idea of a live hypothesis is just the first part of his toolkit. He then says that some choices are so important they become what he calls a genuine option. And for that to happen, they have to meet 3 specific criteria. First, it has to be living, meaning both alternatives have to be real possibilities for you. Second, it's forced. You can't just opt out. Not choosing is a choice. And third, it's got to be momentous. The stakes are really high and it's probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. We're not talking about choosing what to have for breakfast here. This is a life-altering decision.
Okay, so with this toolkit in hand, live versus dead hypotheses, and the idea of a genuine option, James is now ready to deliver his knockout blow to Clifford's rigid, unyielding rule.
And here it is. This is the core of his entire argument. He says that when you are facing a choice that is living, forced, and momentous, and your brain, your intellect, just can't figure it out, then your hopes, your fears, your gut feelings, what he calls your passional nature, they have the right to cast the deciding vote. In fact, he says they must. Why? Because choosing to just wait for more evidence, that isn't some neutral, logical position. It's a choice driven by a passion, the passion of being afraid to be wrong.
So this whole debate, it really just boils down to 2 fundamentally different priorities. Clifford's #1 commandment is avoid error. Avoid it at all costs. He is terrified of being fooled. But James, he offers a second commandment, gain truth. And he argues that in some cases, the risk of losing out on a vital truth is way, way worse than the risk of being wrong. At the end of the day, you have to decide which risk you're more willing to take.
Now, you might be thinking this all sounds pretty abstract, right? But James goes on to show how this principle has some incredibly practical, real-world consequences.
And this is where his argument takes a really fascinating turn. He points out that there are all these situations, especially ones involving other people, where faith in a fact can help create the fact. Your belief isn't just a passive little thing reflecting reality, it can actually be an active ingredient in shaping that reality.
Just think about it. A new company or a social movement, it only gets off the ground if every single person trusts that everyone else will do their part.
A team that truly believes it can win plays with a totally different energy, right? And even on a personal level, if you extend trust to someone, you often encourage them to be trustworthy. In every single one of these cases, that initial belief is the necessary first step for the reality you want to even have a chance of happening.
So, this brings us to the grand finale of James's argument, where he takes this powerful logic and applies it to the biggest genuine options of all.
So let's run the religious question through his framework. For a whole lot of people, yeah, it's a living option. And James says it's also forced. Now, why is it forced? Because if it turns out to be true, you lose out on all the benefits by sitting on the fence, just as much as if you had actively said, I don't believe. And, of course, it is profoundly momentous, because the stakes are, well, they're ultimate. So, it checks all three boxes for a genuine option that our intellect just can't solve on its own.
And this leads to a really powerful conclusion. When it comes to something like the religious hypothesis, sitting on the fence, being a skeptic, isn't some safe, superior, neutral ground. Nope, it's an active choice. It's a bet. You're betting that the fear of being wrong is a better guide than the hope of finding a life-changing truth.
To really drive this home, James leaves us with this incredible, haunting metaphor. Life's biggest questions, he's saying, aren't like some calm academic debate in a classroom. They're like being lost in a blizzard on a mountain pass. Standing still, refusing to choose, that is not the safe option. It's a fatal one. We are forced to act, to take a leap in the dark based on the best we have, and that includes our hope.
And that really leaves us with the final question. William James doesn't tell you what you should believe. He just fiercely argues for your right to believe something. He points out that when it comes to the huge, unavoidable questions of life, we are all taking a risk. So if you accept that doing nothing is its own kind of risk, which path will you choose to venture down?